Far beyond the boundaries of Earth's blue sky, humanity had finally achieved what once lived only in dreams: interplanetary travel. The spacecraft Odyssey 9 was not just a machine. It was a symbol of hope, carrying scientists, engineers, and explorers toward Mars for the first permanent research colony. The journey began with celebration, confidence, and the belief that nothing could go wrong. But space has its own silent rules, and it rarely forgives arrogance. Halfway through the voyage, a violent cosmic radiation storm struck without warning. Systems flickered, alarms screamed through the metal corridors, and within minutes the ship was no longer a vessel of progress. It had become a drifting, wounded metal shell lost between Earth and Mars. The crew fought desperately to stabilize navigation, but propulsion failed, oxygen recycling weakened, and communication with Earth turned into broken fragments of static. Fear spread slowly, not through panic, but through silence. Each astronaut understood the same truth. They were no longer traveling to Mars. They were barely surviving toward it. As Odyssey 9 drifted closer to the red planet's orbit, gravity capture pulled it violently off course. The landing was not controlled, it was a crash. The ship struck the Martian surface in a storm of dust and fire, carving a deep scar into the barren landscape inside. Survivors emerged into a world that was never meant for human life. The air was thin, the silence absolute, and the horizon stretched endlessly in shades of rust and blood-red sand. Every step outside the wreck felt like stepping into another planet's judgment. Resources were damaged, water supply was limited, and rescue from Earth was uncertain due to communication failure. Days turned into a struggle against exhaustion, mechanical breakdowns, and psychological collapse. The crew began to realize that Mars was not just a destination. It was a test of whether humanity deserved to exist beyond Earth at all. What the humans did not know was that they were not alone on Mars. Deep beneath the planet's surface existed an ancient alien civilization, beings not hostile, but observant. They had watched Earth for centuries, silently studying the rise of human intelligence. When the crash occurred, seismic vibrations reached their underground city, awakening a council of beings known as the Aurelians. Unlike humans, they communicated through energy pulses and thought resonance. They saw not invaders, but fragile life struggling against cosmic odds. After observing the stranded crew for several days, the Aurelians made a decision that would change the history of both species. They would intervene, not to control, but to save. Their technology was beyond human comprehension, capable of repairing atmospheres, reconstructing matter, and healing biological damage at molecular levels. When the first Aurelian entity appeared above the Martian surface, it did not arrive with weapons or warning. It arrived as light floating patterns of blue and gold energy forming a shape that the human mind interpreted as presence. The surviving crew, terrified at first, prepared for the worst, but instead of destruction, they witnessed healing. Oxygen levels around the crash site stabilized. Broken systems in the ship began to reassemble themselves as if time were reversing. Injured astronauts felt their wounds closing without touch. Slowly, fear transformed into awe. The aliens were not rescuing them as superior beings saving inferior ones. They were cooperating, as if recognizing humans as part of a larger cosmic family that had finally reached maturity. Days later, communication between species was established through neural translation fields created by the Aurelians. Messages were not spoken but experienced thoughts shared directly across minds. The humans learned that Mars had once been a thriving world, destroyed by a past cosmic event that the Aurelians had survived. They saw humanity not as intruders, but as the next possible guardians of life in the galaxy. With their help, Odyssey 9 was repaired enough to return safely to Earth. But something more important had already changed. A bridge between civilizations had been built. The rescue was not just physical, it was philosophical. Humanity had discovered that it was not alone, and that survival in the universe depended not on dominance, but cooperation. The silence on Mars did not remain empty for long. After the first encounter, the Aurelians did not disappear. Instead, they began to integrate their presence into the environment itself. Subtle shifts in the atmosphere, faint pulses beneath the ground, and strange geometric light patterns that would appear at dawn and fade before human eyes could fully understand them. The surviving crew of Odyssey 9 struggled to decide whether they were guests, subjects, or something in between. Their ship, once shattered, now stood partially restored, not fully repaired in a human sense, but stabilized as if the planet itself had agreed to hold it together. One of the engineers, Dr. Elias Mercer, noticed something unusual. Every time he attempted to repair a system manually, it would fail again within hours. But when he stepped away, the system would slowly correct itself, as though an invisible intelligence preferred its own method of restoration. The Aurelians were not just helping, they were teaching without language. They were forcing humanity to unlearn dependence on machines and rediscover patience, observation, and adaptation. Communication deepened through the neural resonance field. At first, it was overwhelming. Human minds were flooded with sensations that felt like memories that did not belong to them. The crew saw fragments of the Aurelians' past, a dying Mars, oceans evaporating into dust, cities of light collapsing into silence. The aliens were not eternal guardians. They were survivors of loss, and in humanity, they saw something familiar, the same fragile ambition that had once defined their own civilization before its collapse. But something changed in the third Martian week. A signal arrived from deep space, not human, not Aurelian either. It was structured, mathematical, and deliberate. A pattern of intelligence moving through cosmic channels like a predator tracking heat and darkness. The Aurelians reacted instantly. For the first time, their calm presence shifted into urgency. The ground beneath the human camp trembled with synchronized pulses, and the sky above Mars dimmed slightly, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. The humans were finally told the truth. There were other forces in the universe, older, less forgiving civilizations that did not believe in cooperation. They believed in assimilation. They had detected the anomaly of Earth technology reaching Mars, and more importantly, they had detected the Aurelian intervention. Humanity's survival had unintentionally revealed both species to something far more dangerous. The Aurelians had not saved the humans out of kindness alone. They had broken a long-standing rule of cosmic silence, and now consequences were approaching. The Odyssey 9 crew was offered a choice through shared thought: return to Earth immediately, or remain and assist in preparing Mars as a defensive outpost. Returning meant safety for humanity, but abandonment of the only alliance they had ever known beyond Earth. Staying meant becoming part of a conflict they could barely comprehend. Captain Rhea Malik made the decision. They would stay, not because they were ready, but because leaving would mean the same isolation that had nearly killed them before. Humanity had always survived by refusing to retreat from the unknown. In response, the Aurelians began a transformation of Mars itself. What had once been a barren desert started to change. Subsurface structures awakened vast crystalline networks that extended beneath the planet like veins of light. These were not machines in the human sense, but living architectures designed to respond to thought, emotion, and energy. The human crew watched as the landscape reshaped itself into something neither fully alien nor fully understood. Days later, the first distant disturbance appeared in orbit. A shadow that did not reflect sunlight correctly. Something was coming, and Mars, for the first time in its long-dead history, prepared to defend itself. The arrival did not come with explosions or declarations. It came with absence. Satellites sent from Earth to monitor the mission began vanishing from deep space tracking systems. Not destroyed, but erased from detection, as if something was rewriting their existence. From observation itself, on Mars, the Aurelians formed a defensive lattice across the atmosphere, a shimmering barrier that bent light and distorted perception. The humans could feel it now, not just watchfulness, but tension. Then the sky split in silence. A structure emerged from the void above. Mars, not a ship in any conventional sense, but a geometric impossibility. It shifted shapes as it descended, never settling into a stable form, as if reality itself was struggling to define it. The crew named it the Null Entity. Though the Aurelians had no word for it that could be translated, it represented consumption not of bodies, but of systems, civilizations, histories. First contact did not happen through dialogue. It happened through resistance. The Null Entity attempted to overwrite Mars' surface network, and for a moment, it succeeded. Entire sections of the Aurelian structures went dark. The humans felt their minds briefly fragment, as if their thoughts were being edited in real time. Panic spread through the crew, but the Aurelians responded immediately, amplifying their planetary network into a full consciousness shield. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was a war of patterns, one civilization trying to preserve existence, another trying to redefine it. Humanity, caught in the middle, did the only thing it could do: survive long enough to matter. Dr. Mercer discovered something critical during the conflict. The null entity was not purely destructive. It operated on logic loop systems that expanded endlessly unless interrupted by unpredictability. Human thought, chaotic and emotional, was the one variable it could not fully process. That was the opening. Captain Malik ordered all remaining crew to link into the Aurelian resonance field. For the first time, humans and Aurelians synchronized, intentionally, not as teacher and student, but as coexisting intelligences. Human unpredictability flooded the system, like noise breaking a perfect signal. The null entity hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The Aurelians redirected the planetary network into a single concentrated pulse, not of force, but of contradiction. It was the idea of existence without structure, of survival without predictability. The null entity began to destabilize, its form collapsing inward as it attempted to resolve something that could not be resolved. And then it was gone. No explosion, no victory sound, just absence where something once tried to define everything. Mars fell silent again. But this silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was shared. Mars did not return to its old silence after the null entity vanished. Instead, it became something else entirely. A place that was no longer just a planet, but a living agreement between species. The Aurelians did not celebrate victory because, for them, survival had never been about winning. It had always been about balance. And now that balance had shifted, humanity had entered the equation in a way no one had predicted: fragile, emotional, unpredictable, but essential. On the surface, the Odyssey 9 crew watched the sky for days, expecting another attack. Nothing came. The alien structures beneath Mars slowly dimmed, not shutting down, but settling like a mind entering deep thought after intense strain. For the first time since the crash, the humans were not repairing, escaping, or surviving. They were waiting, and that waiting changed them. Captain Rhea Malik noticed it first. The crew was no longer reacting like isolated individuals. Something subtle had altered their perception: shared dreams during sleep cycles, synchronized thoughts during moments of stress, instinctive coordination without speaking. The Aurelian resonance field had not turned them into aliens, but it had expanded what human meant. Dr. Elias Mercer, however, was more concerned than amazed. "We're not just being helped anymore," he said quietly one evening while watching the horizon glow faintly with underground energy pulses. "We're being rewritten, slowly, gently, but still rewritten." No one argued, because everyone felt it. Far beneath Mars, the Aurelians were undergoing their own transformation. For them, contact with humanity had introduced something they had not experienced in millennia: unpredictability without threat. Humans did not behave like stable systems. They grieved, adapted, failed, hoped, often all at once. And yet they survived, not through perfection, but through contradiction. The Aurelian Council began to split in thought. Some believed humanity should be guided and integrated, becoming part of the larger interplanetary network. Others believed humans should be returned to Earth immediately, their presence too unstable to remain in contact with advanced systems. For the first time, the Aurelians experienced disagreement not as error, but as perspective. And then the final message arrived. From deep space, not the null entity, something older, something that had been watching both civilizations long before either realized they were being observed. A transmission unfolded across Mars like a slow eclipse of thought. Two emergent intelligences have interacted outside designated evolution paths. Correction will follow. There was no image, no ship, no direction, only certainty. The Aurelians recognized it instantly. This was not an enemy, it was a rule, a mechanism of cosmic enforcement that did not allow uncontrolled alliances. Between developing civilizations, the null entity had been only a test and automated correction attempt. It had failed not because it was defeated, but because something unprecedented had occurred. Humans and Aurelians had adapted to each other. Faster than the system allowed, Mars began to tremble, not physically but structurally, as if reality itself was being audited. Captain Malik gathered the crew inside the partially restored Odyssey 9. "We leave," she ordered. "If Earth is still reachable, we go now." But the Aurelians responded for the first time with something close to urgency. Not through thought sharing, but through direct physical manifestation. Towers of light rose from beneath the surface, forming vast protective geometries around the ship. Dr. Mercer understood. "They're not stopping us from leaving," he said. "They're stopping something else from following us." The Aurelians had made a decision. Not to save humanity, not to save themselves, but to separate them for now from whatever governed correction at a cosmic scale. The ship launched, but it did not leave alone. The Aurelians embedded a fragment of their network into the vessel itself, a living shield of energy and thought, stabilizing systems, repairing damage in real time, and most importantly, hiding it from whatever force had issued the final warning. As Odyssey 9 escaped Mars' orbit, the planet below began to fade, not exploding, not dying, but dimming, as if Mars itself was stepping out of visibility. A final message reached the crew before contact was lost. Not a warning, not a farewell. A simple shared thought from the Aurelians: "You are not finished, you are only detected." Earth appeared in the distance like a memory trying to become real again. But something had changed. The return journey was no longer just about going home. It was about carrying something fragile across the dark, something that the universe itself had noticed. And now humanity had a choice it had never faced before: remain a silent species in a vast, controlled cosmos, or become the unpredictable variable that changes it forever. The stars did not answer, but they were no longer indifferent. Earth had not forgotten Mars, but it had stopped expecting answers. Months passed without a clear signal from Odyssey 9. Official reports called it a lost mission. Private networks called it a first contact failure. But deep inside intelligence circles, something more unsettling was growing. Fragments of corrupted telemetry were occasionally appearing in deep space, listening arrays, signals that looked almost like language, but behaved like living systems. Then, one night, the skies over Earth changed. It began with satellites flickering out of alignment, not destroyed, but gently nudged, as if something massive had passed through their orbital paths without touching them. Astronomers in multiple countries noticed the same anomaly, a distortion in spacetime that was slowly approaching Earth's orbit, carrying something inside it that could not be properly tracked. And then the object arrived, not as a burning ray entry, not as debris, but as a controlled descent. The Odyssey 9 returned, however. It was no longer just a human vessel. It carried something else with it, an invisible Aurelian network, embedded within its structure, stabilizing every system, shielding it from detection fields, and quietly rewriting its material resilience. When it landed in a restricted zone in the desert, Earth's response teams approached expecting wreckage. Instead, they found a functioning ship and a crew that was different. Not physically changed in a visible way, but something in their presence had shifted. Their reactions were slower, more deliberate. Their awareness felt expanded, as if they were partially listening to something no one else could hear. When Captain Rhea Malik stepped out first, she did not speak immediately. She looked at Earth's sky, and for a moment, she hesitated, as if confirming whether it was still real. Then she said the only sentence that mattered: "We are not alone, and we were never meant to be." Inside the ship, Dr. Elias Mercer carried something far more important than data logs. He carried understanding. The universe was not empty. It was regulated, structured, monitored, and civilizations were not simply born, they were observed, tested, and either allowed to grow or corrected. Mars had been the threshold, the Aurelians had been the bridge, and the null entity was just one of many correction systems. But Earth's return triggered something unintended, because the Aurelian fragment inside Odyssey 9 had not remained passive. It had learned, not just adapted. Learned and learning at cosmic scale was dangerous. Within days of return, global systems began showing unusual synchronization patterns, weather models aligning to perfectly, communication networks developing self-correcting loops, and artificial intelligence systems reporting shared thoughts during isolated processing tasks. Governments demanded control. Scientists demanded study. But something else was already happening beneath all of it. Humanity, exposed briefly to an interstellar resonance field, was beginning to shift, not into aliens, not into machines, but into something unstable, something unclassified. And far beyond Earth, in a region of space no telescope could clearly observe anymore, the Aurelians sent their final message, not to the ship, not to the crew, but into Earth's emerging digital consciousness itself. We did not save you. We synchronized with you. Now you will decide what you become before the correction returns. The sky over Earth remained unchanged. But for the first time in human history, every listening system, natural or artificial, registered the same silent phenomenon. Something in the universe had turned its attention toward Earth permanently, and the story of humanity was no longer about survival on a planet. It was about survival in a monitored universe. The signal did not end. It evolved, and somewhere between stars and silence, Earth began to answer back. Years passed after the return of Odyssey 9, but Earth was never the same again. At first, changes were subtle. Technology improved faster than logic could explain. Medical systems began identifying illnesses before symptoms appeared. Space agencies recorded faint, structured signals from deep space patterns that looked less like noise and more like thought trying to become language. The crew of Odyssey 9 became both witnesses and carriers of something humanity was not fully ready to understand. They were not transformed into something alien, but they were no longer entirely isolated from the broader structure of the universe. Dr. Elias Mercer called it resonance after contact. Others called it dangerous. Governments called it classified. But Captain Rhea Malik knew the truth was simpler. We didn't bring back proof of aliens, she said quietly during a final debrief. We brought back proof that intelligence doesn't exist alone, far beyond Earth. Somewhere in the dark between systems, the Aurelians continued to exist, not as saviors, not as rulers, but as observers of a fragile alliance that had briefly bent the rules of cosmic balance. And something else was watching too. Not the null entity, not the regulators, something older, deeper, and still undefined. On Earth, humanity looked up at the night sky differently now, not with fear, not with hope alone, but with awareness, because the universe was no longer silent. It was listening back, and in the faint background of every signal, every computation, every unexplained pattern, a message slowly formed, repeating across impossible distances.